Welcome everyone to Financial Foundations. We are excited to have this topic tonight, talking about what if your largest giver was no longer a member of your church. And tonight it'll be Jeff Pospisil from the Dakota's United Methodist Conference Treasurer's Office. I work with you every day, Jeff. Couldn't remember where you came from.
No, we don't normally address each other in titles.
No. And I'm Sherry Meister. I am the director of the Dakotas and Minnesota United Methodist Foundations. So it is great to be here tonight, and welcome to everyone. I think we have a few people still jumping on, and we'll just welcome them as they come in.
One of the things to remember is to use the chat function. That's the best way to communicate with us while we're on the live, and then I'll either bring it to Sherry or Sherry will bring it to me, either way. So
I also want to say thank you to Kelsey Morgan. She is our behind the scene person, and I couldn't do this without her. Could I, Jeff?
Nope.
Jeff probably could, but I could not do this without her. So thanks, Kels, for being here. So tonight we're going to begin to talk about endowments and investments. And as we said, this is who we are. But what if your two largest givers aren't even members? And then how to get the most from your investment and endowments. And one afternoon, Jeff and I were visiting about how we can get the point across of how important investments and endowment funds for a church are. And as we were talking about it, some of the best ministries across the conferences have come out of endowments that have been given to their churches from someone from years and years ago who are no longer even living. And so their gift is a forever gift, and it's benefiting their church for eternity. So imagine leaving or accepting a gift that would support your ministries forever. And that's what endowments and investment accounts can do for you as you invest them in a management company and invest them for the future in the ministry of the church, and then live off the interest forever. Endowment funds is a fund established by a foundation, and it makes consistent withdrawals from the invested capital. The way the foundations work at our foundation and many community foundations is that our investment committee sets an annual distribution rate. And then that rate is what the foundations receive annually. So this year it's set at a 4.5%. And so 4.5 of that endowed dollars goes back to your church or your ministry every year. The endowment funds are invested in portfolios, as I mentioned, and the initial money to the foundation or the organization, no one ever spends it. That corpus stays the same as the initial gift according to the markets, but you do not draw off the initial gift. Then an endowment should have an investment withdrawal, as we talked about. In our case, it's 4.5%, a usage policy, and then govern it how the best to use it. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Did we have a poll before this?
Oh my
or was I forgetting?
Yep, go ahead, Kelsey. We had just talked about the polls, and then I skipped.
Now we got people excited about a graph, and
I know, and I interrupted the excitement.
So our first poll is, do you have the church in your will? Yes, no, or I'm planning to. Yes, no, or I'm planning to. And the interesting thing, Sherry, what percentage of people have you found have the church in their will?
According to one of the state attorneys that I have visited with, said that church people that come in to visit with him, there's only about 7 to 11% of those individuals who mention the church as one of the beneficiaries in their will.
And you look at it right now, I think we're share the results right now, and we're at close to 40% of, because people in the Dakotas and Minnesota are extra generous. But
Right.
so it's a real thing though. I mean, that's the thing that we want people to be aware, is that people do give big gifts at times, legacy types of gifts. So, and one of the primary ways you could do that is through your will. So, so first of all, we had a couple of examples too, because again, this is a real thing. So this is our example churches. We don't share the names, but we do want to highlight them. So this is a church in South Dakota. And back in 2002, they set up, a family set up an endowment to support capital projects in the church. And so every year they ended up, and they grew that endowment over time. And right now they've been getting pretty steadily $4,000 to $5,000 a year from that endowment. So the corpus, or the principal, has grown over the years, and also you're seeing the distribution steadily raise now. You do see it did take a big hit in 2008, 2009. Well, the church liked this, and so then they set up a camping endowment as well. So go ahead and go to the next one.
Oops.
And that's because they really wanted to make sure camping was always an important part of that church. So they set up another endowment for camping. And so, you think about the tough year we went through, 2020, and a number of churches were struggling, but to know that you're going to have a $5,000 check to start every year for capital, and that you're not going to have to worry about camp scholarships, for this church was huge. And then they also, right around 2012, they decided to plunk $25,000, so that's on the right axis, $25,000 into 3 different investment accounts, and they just kind of let that grow, and now they're getting close to 40,000 there over the last 8 years. So so that's how it has worked for one church that's had experience with this. And go ahead and go to the next one. So this is a story I really like, and the people in the Dakotas, they would know the name if I mentioned it. But there was a gentleman here who had inherited farmland, about a quarter of irrigated farmland in Nebraska, and he was tired of being a landlord, loved his church, single bachelor all his life. So he decided to set up a charitable remainder trust, and a charitable remainder trust ends up paying him income over his life. So go ahead and throw the bars up. So over the years, this has been what his income is, and he receives 5% of the value of the fund any given year. When he passes, though, the distributions start going to the church, and this is just an estimate. I'm not guaranteeing or predicting that he's going to die in 2022. He's healthy as far as I know, but when he does pass, all of a sudden the church will get that $80,000 to $90,000 a year for the ministry as he designates. So,
Jeff, I think a point right here also is that the gift was mainly, now there was some cash involved and some stocks and bonds, but it was mainly land. And that is one of the services that we have provided for a couple of people, is to sell the land and to process and handle that whole part of the gift. And so we're willing to do that as well, so that the church it doesn't have to be responsible for that, but the foundation will take care of that.
Yeah. And you even worked with him and getting him involved with a lawyer as well to help do all the details of that.
Yeah, so, for the trust.
Yeah.
Then people that come to us sometimes are a little bit apprehensive about putting it into an endowment, knowing that it's a forever amount and you can't draw off the principal. So we also suggest, and we have the capabilities for investment funds. And the investment account is established by your church for a planned project. So if you know of something and you need larger capital amount of money, you can invest it with us for however long that you're needed. And during that time, then, if you do need some from the original principal, you can dip into the original principal and take from that account. The difference, one of the differences here is that you don't get an annual distribution like you do in an endowment, that the investment accounts are for your own determining of when you'd want to use those monies. I found a term over the last few weeks that was interesting to me because sometimes we have a difficult time explaining how investment accounts are different from endowments. And some organizations call it the quasi endowment. So it acts like an endowment on the front end and on the investment side, but it's different as far as the distribution. And we just ask that if you are interested in an investment fund, that you keep it intact for a year and let it work in the markets, and then have any distributions after 1 year. The other thing that we see with churches that they will do is start with an investment account, investment funds, and then as they see the benefits and they can see what can happen and enhance the ministries of their church, they will then turn it into an endowment so that it's a forever account.
So here's another example we had. So we had a couple of examples where a church, they wanted to set aside extra money for the day they'd eventually need to replace their van, is what it was, a vehicle replacement fund. They have one of those large people movers. And so here's shows the money that the balance that they would have shown. So the corpus, if you want to call it that. So they put in about $2,000 in 2017. They put in about another $2,000 in 2018. And then they were able to add about another $4,000 in 2020. So normally, if you were just setting aside money in your checking account, that's all you would have, is right around, I think this is right around $9,500. So, but because they're invested, and they're invested very conservatively in the fixed income fund, so go ahead and add on that. Even though there was some not great returns those years, but they still got an extra 10%. I mean, and so the difference, so when you're saving up to find a vehicle, that's the difference between, I don't know, power windows and roll down windows, something like that. But also it's a difference between having to ask for more money and being able to pay the bill in full. So then we have another one, and I really like this one. We have a ministry in Sioux Falls where they purchased a vehicle in order to feed people. And so they had a $53,000 grant to help maintain this vehicle. And so they received that $53,000 grant in 2016. And then in 2018, 19, 20, and 21, they drew out small amounts of money. They eventually, the total of that is about $17,000 that they've made in withdrawals. So, but when we were visiting with them, they had a choice. We could put it in checking. And if we put it in checking, then we would have slowly dwindled that $53,000 to $36,000. We could have put it in a CD, and that would have helped protect us to some degree. We would have had it closer to $38,000 by the end of this time. But what they did decide to do is invest it. And so they've managed to pull out $17,000, and they've grown their $53,000 to about $66,000. So I really like that one. It's a real example, and it shows how that's what I think. If I was a donor, I would want them to multiply my money. I would want them to, if they keep on this track, this ministry should never end. It is what it ends up being. Versus if you were just putting it in a checking account, you would be able to number your years. So
this, the benefits and the number of people that they're serving too, Jeff, is just incredible. And like you said, it would not be possible without the growing dollars of the initial
we do have
grant.
a question about what type of fees are charged for managing an endowment account.
Do you want me to answer that, or do you?
I can answer it.
Okay.
So yeah, fees are the same as with an investment account. So we do charge a set amount, and it depends on which foundation you're with, but it's a set amount. And then we just do all the administration for the endowment is, I guess, pro bono. So the investment is the same amount for that. but then the administration is just part of our ministry. So we automatically will do the calculations, send out the notices, send out the distributions, and everything else. So there is a set amount for our investment management fee, but that's different. So actually, the cost between an endowment and an investment account is the same. So I was kind of evasive there because there's a difference in the amount of fees that are charged between different foundations. But
I think it's important also to know that the fees go to our services, and our services we're here to provide consultation, education on endowments, helping people understand the importance of the ministries for the churches. And we're turning money into ministry, and we're walking alongside of the churches to be able to do that. And I was at a church last Thursday evening, and it was just so rewarding to be able to work with them, to know that they want to share their message and share what they're doing in their community and across their congregation, and asked if I'd come back out and help spread that word and explain to them how they can do that to get people interested in endowments, investments, and having the church in their will. And it's going to be word of mouth to get that church in your will idea going. Kelsey, I think we have another polling question.
So the question is, do you have endowments or investment accounts at your church? And we do have quite a few. So
yeah, that's great.
So we're preaching to a choir to some degree.
We are.
But it's always nice to also to hear what others are doing too, because some of us we might have an endowment account, or we might have an investment account. So here's
Jeff,
the results.
And think of the number of churches that we've talked to over the years that have them sitting there and not using the earnings off of those because of the scarcity mentality that so many churches have, of the fear of using those dollars in case it'll run dry. And we have example after example of how that is not the case, and that once you use those dollars, then it sort of breeds dollars. More people get excited about it when you have the stories to tell, and then your accounts will increase. Have we shared the results, Kelsey? I can't remember.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, that is the good news, that there's 84% that do have endowment investment accounts. One of the things that people will ask is, we receive this money, how should we spend it? And it's the best thing to do is to have every church should be prepared to receive a gift. And so many churches are not prepared. And so many churches, people within the church community or leadership are not on the same page of how those dollars should be taken care of or spent. And so you need to know your church culture. We truly have some churches that we know it's going to be a culture shift for them to understand the importance of endowments and investments, and that they are very comfortable in the way that their dollars are being managed in either CDs or savings accounts, so that they're holding tight. So do you know your church culture? Is there a generosity and a stewardship feel in your church? Is there a movement of generosity and stewardship? And then does your church have a vision? So that if a donor came to you and they had $50,000 that they wanted to give to the church, but they wanted to know what the vision of the church was, would you be able to tell them the vision of your church? And then have you developed a strategy? So we'll go over these really kind of quickly, but the culture is the customs and attitudes. And like I said before, we've had some churches that their customs and their attitudes are to keep it where it is. We've had people tell us that the donor gifted those dollars and they want it to stay right where it's at. And this donor has been gone for years. And so changing that and having who's ever the gatekeeper of those dollars to understand other options, it becomes work not only for if you bring us in, but also for the people within the church to understand better how those dollars can do. The culture defines who you are, and it's never neutral. It's not, oh, yeah, we can or we can't, or we do or we don't. It either permits generosity and investing those dollars, or it's limiting. And there's never the mix of the two of them. And then the culture's never status quo. They're either becoming more generous or less generous. And much of that is also the presentation and people understanding the ministries that are going on within your church. Jeff, did you have something to add here?
You know, I think a little bit about the first church that I was at was Bismarck First United Methodist Church. And when I first got there, we had, I don't know if this kind of fits into, but we had a little bit of a culture of fear. My very first budget meeting, we were trying to think who would pass away so they might leave us a bequest to fund our budget. And I just think about how much has changed over that time, where all of a sudden they would give away all of their Christmas Eve offering year after year, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. And at the same time, they were paying off or paying towards a capital project. And at the same time, they're building an endowment as well as an investment fund for. So, I mean, it just ended up being one of those interesting things. But it's a slow process, this culture change. I mean, it was same message basically over and over and over again. I remember one time our pastor at the time was Pastor Kermit, and he made a joke because that year that I came on the finance committee was the one year he didn't preach about stewardship, and he said, "I'm never doing that again." You know, kind of the way he says things. And anyway, but he always hit that message and always kind of pushed us. So and that's what we've also worked with churches too, to encourage them in that direction, to kind of give them some kind of a backing so that they could be confident in being able to reach out, because it is a very difficult thing to change your culture. So, and make decisions that are that will help change your culture.
Correct. And then your church vision. Is your vision clear and compelling? Do you know your church's core values? And is your pastor's vision and your church vision aligned? And if those pieces fall into place, you will have a better understanding of who your church is, for if you have someone who wants to give to the church. I had I'm working with a donor that's very philanthropic, and I asked them one day, what is it that you give to? What is it that gives you a reason to give? And they said, is there a clear vision? And do they have plans for the dollars? Will they be going to ministry? Is the organization solid? And can you tell the story? They want to know the stories of your church and of the organization that they are supporting. And if those things cannot be answered, and if it's not a compelling reason to give, the donors will hold back their dollars. For those of you who have heard my presentations before, you'll hear me say over and over, the days of giving because we're the church are no longer. We're in competition with every other organization and nonprofit in your community, and you need to show the reason and celebrate the ministries of your church. And then develop a strategy. I love this. Generosity and building for the future is less like fundraising. And in our fundraising presentations, we've said before that sometimes that gets a little bit awkward, the word fundraising in the church, because it brings you back to all of the pizzas and that you sold, or the candles, or the Krispy Kremes or the ones you had to pay for, or the candles you have sitting around because you bought because you wanted to support the organization. So when you think of it as a spiritual formation and gathering that ministry and bringing it around to your heart of why you want to give is more of compelling than thinking of it as fundraising. And the strategy then is both informational and transformational. Strategy is not transactional. It's not just checking the boxes because we have this done. People will not be as compelled, I keep using the word compelled, but the word compelled to give to transactional strategy. Okay, we've done, check the box. We've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now people should give. It's got to be transformational. And how is it making the impact in touching the hearts of the people within your church? Now, there are things you need to know because they want to know the bottom line is solid. But once you know that, then that's done with that. How does that bottom line help transform lives? And so there's even a math equation for this. So information, how it's applied, equals transformation.
Let's say, yeah. You know, one of the things I love is New Consecration Sunday, by the way, because I think it ties, it reflects this, what you're talking about. It's that whole spiritual component. We're not asking people to give to a budget so that way you can have lights or heating or a paid preacher, whatever it is, but you're giving out of your discipleship. And can I tell a brief story? So one of our,
sure, Jeff.
sure, because I got a mic on.
I would expect nothing other than for you to want to tell a story.
I know, and I've told this one quite a bit, but it's a good, really good story. So one of my first churches that I preached at was at Yankton for their New Consecration Sundays, and I preached on giving, and I didn't do that great of a job. I did better than I had done at previous ones. So, but about 7 years later, I go back to that church and meeting with their leadership, and the pastor asked, "So, did any of you guys remember Jeff when he preached here?" And one old guy gets up, and old guy meaning he was about in his 80s. He gets up, "I remember him," and I was like, "Oh, that doesn't sound good." He says, "Yeah, I remember you preaching, and you challenged us to tithe, and I got to tell you, I decided I would work towards it, and over these number of years, I've started giving more than a tithe." And then he sat down. He was kind of getting emotional while he was doing it. Well, then somebody else told a story, and then he got back up, and he just said, I just got to tell you this. This journey towards tithing has been the greatest journey of my life. I had no idea what I was missing out on." And so, and I think that's what you want to see. That church, again, they highlight their ministries. They lead them towards spiritual transformation. And it is exactly that equation. They give them the information, they provide the opportunity to apply it, and they see that change. They invite them into that change. So.
Right. And Jeff, that is a great story to have, because you touched the heart, even in the information and more of the technical piece, you touched the heart of that individual, and for him to remember that and then to relive it when you were there, that is a great story. Kels, don't we have, or Kels, I have a dog named Kelsey, so sorry, Kels. Don't we have another question here about strategy?
So the question here.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, the question is, what % of your operating budget is funded from other sources other than the offering plate? So we're talking about, is your budget fully funded through what you receive in the offering plate? Do you receive, 1 to 10% from other sources, either your reserves or endowments or fundraisers? And this was just to give us an idea.
I think the important thing here is to help people understand that we want it more funded from the operating and less from the reserves, so that those reserve dollars can be invested or put into an endowment and help build the endowment. and for the longevity of your church. And I always say the people in the pew should be paying the light bill.
Yeah.
So 1 to 10% is okay.
Yeah.
So Jeff and I are on these next couple slides. We're going to take this in two different directions a little bit, but we want it to come together because these are the two areas that we each focus on when somebody is in a plan to be able to start with an endowment or an investment. And churches that have this strategy, they know their culture and they have their vision. The next step to be prepared is to be prepared for a gift is to have a gift acceptance policy. And we're going to share some of these ideas through email afterwards. But to have this acceptance policy so that everybody is on board with whatever gifts are coming in. A couple of the churches that I visited with in the last couple weeks, I told one church that if you have this acceptance policy, then if a gift comes in that is not of a benefit to your church, that is just becomes another something to dust. One church had 7 pianos because they didn't know how to say no to a piano. And those things then become a burden of the church. And another burden sometimes is when people want to give a boat. And then for tax reasons, then they can have a write-off for the amount of that boat. And so you want to make sure that you either have a way to liquidate the gift, that you have a purpose for that gift. You also don't want someone to come in that doesn't have the vision of your church. And that's why I say the vision and the strategy are so important, because I used this the other night. If somebody comes in and gives a large gift and said the earnings always have to be used for purple carpet, and you don't want purple carpet, your gift acceptance policy will help you either reframe that gift or discourage that gift so that you don't have to have purple carpet. And then the investment policy, and that goes, we'll share some ideas of that, but that helps in where you're going to invest it, which funds you're going to invest it, and how you're going to invest the dollars in the gift. And then the spending policy. And this is what our investment committee does in the Dakotas, is they set that distribution rate. And so then that's the spending policy included with how those dollars are going to be spent, so that it doesn't go to purple carpet and you have an idea of where those monies are going to be spent. You don't want anybody to come in with a pet project and be able to kind of derail your vision.
And we do have some practical examples for this, because I think the tendency why you have these different policies is to either stray from the purpose, so for example, we have that new van policy, or that new van fund. You don't all of a sudden want to start tapping into it to replace your shingles if that's not the priority. Also, the spending policy or investment policy. So what is your target? I always like thinking of what my target is and when do I use money? How much is it wise to use? Depending on that. So those kind of things, I look at, especially at some of our pension funds, for example. The Dakotas United Methodist Conference, we were able to decide that we had $7 million we need to distribute back to our churches in some way. So, but if we hadn't had that policy, our tendency would be to think, well, you never have enough. I mean, that's just the way we are in the Dakotas. I would guess Minnesota is kind of the same in that we never have enough. How much is enough? Just a little more. So.
And the reason I think it's so important to have these in place before is so that when that gift comes in to your church, then they're set in place, and you don't have to develop the policy that's in line with the intention of the gift if it doesn't fit within your vision and the mission of your church and the ministries that you're trying to promote and that are being or reaching new people and that are being effective within your church. This is Jeff's theory now.
Yeah, so for me, what I notice, so people, we're either one way or the other way. One way is we don't do any planning, and we just all of a sudden money hits us, and that's what Sherry was really trying to prepare us. So if we don't have money, or that's one of the ways is we just wait until money hits us. But the other way is we have a lot of churches that always wish they had money. Man, I wish we had an emergency fund. Man, I wish we had endowments. So, but there are things you can do right now besides just talking about it. And like I was back at Bismarck First, trying to plan on who's going to die that'll leave us money. So one of the things you could do, first of all, as we've had a number of churches that have decided they need an emergency fund. They didn't have anything. So they just started putting aside a set amount out of their budget. And it was just a small amount. I mean, one church started it 3 or 4 years ago and slowly added to it. And now it's at $50,000, which for them is a quarter of their budget. Awesome thing to do. They would have never dreamed they would be able to have $50,000 for an emergency fund the way they were operating before. Another church, actually a couple other churches, they wanted to encourage these endowment gifts, these bequests. And so they held workshops. They brought in somebody from Sioux Falls. They did a sermon that was highlighting the need, because there's something about leaving a legacy to bless your kids and your grandkids and people that you're never going to meet, bless the world, basically. But then to give them the practical tools to provide somebody, hey, here's somebody that'll fill in the details. And Sherry's talked to people about this before. So it's that idea of once you plan, just do it. Don't just wait. I like that, Sherry. So thanks.
Well, it worked for Nike, so it should, maybe we can learn from them.
Because here, I mean, one of the best examples I have is actually Mitchell Christian. So we were debating on starting an endowment for a long time, and we had $70,000 in our checking account waiting to do it. And almost as soon as we did it, so that stayed $70,000 for about 5 years. And then I said, let's just invest it. Let's just do it. And we eventually pushed it forward. And right now, that was about 8 years ago, and now it's $500,000. If we would have held on to it, it would have been $70,000 still. I mean, it's just one of those things where sometimes you just got to do it and jump in.
Kelsey, I think that we missed a polling question, and it'd be kind of fun to see where people are at on the strategy. So thank you.
What driving conditions best describe your church's vision and strategy? Good visibility, light traffic, meaning you got a clear vision. Forget road conditions, we're staying in the garage. I guess that means we're just hoping to keep the doors open. Light rain at rush hour, meaning we got most things done, but we still got quite a bit of obstacles. Blizzard in January and the defrost isn't working. Meaning we're driving, but we can't see. Curvy roads with intermittent patches of ice. And that's probably what I think is the in-between one. And what we're seeing now is that people it is a good mix. And that's fine. There's a lot in let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So yeah, it is a good number of churches do have their 27% have a good plan.
And just know that if you need some help with those, or if you need some resources, we are available to help in that area. And if you need some direction, or you need us to come in and talk with the rest of your churches, we'd be glad, or the rest of the individuals in your church and committees, we'd be glad to do that. I love this quote because it puts it into focus on why we're doing what we do and how we move people from where they are today towards living in a way that is more consistent with the picture of Jesus we see in the Gospels, and keeping that vision in front. This Chris Willard and Jim Shepard. I'm going to share a book with you next because this is a great book. Some of this information on tonight's webinar came from here, and they put it into perspective really well on why it's so important to have the focus on generosity. And it's helped me rethink of some things as I revisited this book, because one of their comments is vision trumps everything. So if you're trying to do two things and you're at a committee meeting and two different ideas want to go forward, the idea that focuses on the vision always trumps everything else at the table. And they give great examples on how to keep you remembering to keep your eye on, keep your eye on the ball and keep that focus. Well, Jeff, this brings us to the end of our webinar tonight, and we want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in. As we've said before, we are here for anyone who has questions or would like to learn more about investments, endowments, and how to plan that vision for your church. And Jeff, what's the next topic, or when is the next webinar?
The next one is August, I believe it's 9th. And I don't have a title on it yet, but it's going to be QuickBooks in your church is going to be what it basically is. A number of churches have moved to QuickBooks in recent years or are thinking about it. And I've seen it where it could be a big help to get your mind wrapped around that. So that'll be the next topic. So some of you guys that are not into that, tough, but there will be other of us nerds that'll like it. So
it'll be probably a little more technical than transformational, Jeff. Would you say that?
I would say it'd be technical.
Yeah. I'll bring in the transformational part as the sidekick for that one. Thank you, everybody. Again, if you have questions, don't hesitate to call our office, and we appreciate you spending time with us tonight. See you next